Hello friends. Welcome to the Eastern Front channel. Today we will talk with you about the memoirs of Friedrich Paulus Adjutant, Arno von Lenski, who fought with Paulus until he was captured in 1943. General Blumentritt had arrived at army headquarters. The last preparations for the attack on Stalingrad across the Don was complete. The divisions were waiting in their ready positions. Paulus and Schmidt discussed the conduct of the attack with him once more. The commander-in-chief expressly stressed that success could only be assured if every threat to the 400-kilometer northern flank was eliminated. Blumentritt obtained a very instructive impression of our endangered situation from this meeting. On the August 19th, the 6th Army's orders to attack went out to the general's commands. That afternoon I was at Major General Schmidt's for a conference. In his office hung greatly enlarged aerial photographs of Stalingrad. For the first time I saw a clear representation of the city, which was marked only by a small cross on our maps. It extended for more than 60 kilometers in a 4 or 7 kilometer wide strip along the western bank of the Volga. I had not realized how big it was until now. The question immediately arose, will we be able to take this vast city in the first attempt off the move? The enemy already knows our intentions. While we were fighting for Kalich, the Russians had set out, as our airmen reported, several belts of fortifications with anti-tank ditches. While we were having to put our forces in order and regroup, he had gained another 14 days. Despite reinforcement by the 24th Panzer Division and the 297th Infantry Division, the 4th Panzer Army had been unable to thrust across the Volga south of the city. Our current attack would in no way come as a surprise to the Russian High Command. What you say is quite correct. If we can punch through with a clenched fist to the northern edge of Stalingrad, and the 4th Panzer Army simultaneously enters in the south in a further attack, then the enemy will have to fight on two sides about 60 kilometers apart. Whether they are in a position to do so, I have strong reservations. We have thought through all the variations. Ammunition and fuel is available in sufficient quantities. Without doubt, the High Command of the Red Army has used these last 4 weeks or so to bring forward reinforcements, clear the factories, evacuate the civilian population, and prepare the city for effective defense. That will bring us some hard fighting, but I am convinced that we will soon achieve it. Listening to Schmidt, it seemed possible that our headquarters had taken everything into account. We expected some hard fighting with apparently also heavy casualties, but in the end victory would be ours. I left the conference with the army orders and went to my tent to study the documents in detail. In my mind I could still see the aerial photographs of the city on the Volga. Stalingrad was of great strategic significance. It was the connecting link between the Caucasus and Central Russia. Once we had the city in our hands, the enemy would be cut off from the cornfields of the Kuban and the oil wells between the Caspian and Black Seas. One of the Russians' most important traffic routes would be broken at its strongest junction, but what if we were unable to take the city in the first attack? Reconnaissance of the terrain had shown that the sector of the Don between Lutshensky and Ostrovsky offered a ready starting point for the 6th Army's attack on Stalingrad. The western bank was wooded. Thick bushes and deep ravines in the steep bank running down to the Don offered wonderful camouflage, enabling the positioning of equipment and the construction of tank-carrying bridges right up to the river's edge, without the enemy being able to see them. In addition to this, from the west bank we could see for kilometers over the flat eastern terrain. Paulus described the plan of attack to the commanding generals at headquarters. He had the intention to use the corps, to which the 295th and 76th Infantry Divisions were attached, to form bridgeheads on either side of Vršiači east of the Don, and from these to thrust to the Volga north of Stalingrad with the 14th Panzer Corps. After breaking through the enemy defensive line, the List Corps should protect the left flank and the 13th Corps the right flank of the tanks storming through to the Volga. The 11th Corps should remain to provide flank protection in the Don Bend between Melev and Kletskaya, while the 24th Panzer Corps, with only the 71st Infantry Division at its disposal after giving up both the 44th Panzer Division and the 297th Infantry Division, would form a bridgehead near Kalich and attack eastwards from there. The Army's headquarters had been as busy as a beehive over the past 10 days. Orderly officers came and went, messages were sorted and evaluated, commanding generals appeared for personal consultations, pilots reported on their observations, conferences took place continuously. Now there was an expectant hush. What would the next day bring? This question was the center point of our table talks on the August 20th. I can hardly think, said the first general staff officer, that the crossing will cost large casualties. The enemy position is easily visible from our side, our artillery has the ranges, the infantry and engineers have been carefully instructed. After a short artillery preparation, the assault craft will cross the Don. By the time the Russians come to their senses on the other side, we will be on the opposite bank. If everything goes smoothly, agreed, I said, but if our artillery does not cut off all their machine gun nests, then the crossing will be really expensive. 2 days ago a divisional adjutant told me that he himself was on the river bank and saw where the enemy had carefully camouflaged their nests. It was particularly difficult to pick out the nests lying immediately on the river bank. Schmidt said, "Don't worry, gentlemen, it won't be easy, but we will soon do it," whereupon he left. I had already long before sought out 2 old regimental comrades that were with the 76th Infantry Division, who knew whether I would see them again after the forthcoming battle. I had therefore quickly asked permission from Major General Schmidt to drive to the 76th. "Of course you can go, Adam. Greet General Rodenberg for me, I wish him all the best, arrange your journey so that you are back before nightfall." The time dragged. Within 15 minutes I had driven off in a cross-country vehicle. Despite the heavily congested road, we made good progress. The black dust that the motorized vehicles were throwing up was very troublesome, and overtaking a convoy of trucks we plunged into a thick cloud of it. The driver tried to speed up, but soon the windscreen was covered in such thick dust that he had to stop. I climbed out to brush the dust off with a cloth. I had to laugh when I saw him through the now shiny glass. His face was as black as the ace of spades. The driver was no less amused and invited me to look in the mirror. I did not look any different. The dust had penetrated every crevice in the vehicle, even the engine was covered with dust a centimeter thick. Going forwards was almost impossible. We therefore turned off the road and drove across the steppe by compass. Several times streams obliged us to turn back onto the road to get across a bridge. Here chaos ruled an inconceivable throng. Dozens of ammunition trucks were trying to reach their artillery positions before nightfall. Jeeps and horse-drawn carts were rushing forward. In between, motorcycles twisted their way through. Engines, horses and humans caused such a din that one could not understand a single word. I reached the headquarters of the 76th Infantry Division between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. hours. It had been set up in a small wood immediately behind the regimental preparatory areas. In front of the tents on the edge of the wood stood the desk of the divisional commander. Major General Rodenberg was leaning over the maps on which the lines of attack and objectives were shown. Next to him stood his first general staff officer, Lieutenant Colonel Breithaupt. I directed my driver to drive right up to the table, which caused the lieutenant colonel to approach us angrily. Who was daring to bring a vehicle up so close? Then he recognized me, with pleasure. We had not seen each other since the autumn of 1936. At that time we were company commanders in the same battalion in Gießen and Worms. I had always got on very well with Breithaupt, a farmer's son from Thuringen. Rodenberg greeted me. "It is good that you visit us for once. We have already often spoken about you. If you had come here an hour earlier you would have met General Paulus." He chatted with us for a long time. Previously he had been to the 295th Infantry Division. Was the Commander-in-Chief content? "We think so, yes," answered Breithaupt. He had us report exactly how the attack would be conducted, then he approved our orders. He had me escort him to an infantry regiment in the front line, and finally visited an artillery observation post. "How do you rate our chances of success, General?" To know that I am an optimist, without doubt our preparations could not have remained completely concealed from the enemy, but we will soon get it moving. Until now I have always been able to leave things to my Brandenburgers. Breithaupt added. Paulus spoke to the sappers up in front. "Everything is ready. As soon as we have driven the enemy back from the river bank, the sappers will immediately begin constructing the bridge. Until the bridge is ready, the tank hunters and artillery will follow the infantry on ferries. Artillery observers are going forward with the first attacking wave. You can see that everything must go well for us. We will also be breaking strong resistance." "What is the atmosphere among the troops, Breithaupt?" Paulus asked us the same question. How can I answer? You should go to the regiment, Adam, they can tell you themselves. We are happy with our soldiers. It was really time to drive on to Abraham. If I wanted to be back at our headquarters before dark, I said goodbye to Rodenberg and Breithaupt. As I was climbing into the vehicle, I was wondering whether everything would go as the two of them thought. Certainly Breithaupt was a competent chap, but the enemy knew what stood ahead of him. The Russians have certainly not become idle. A messenger from one of the regiments that had been detached to the divisional headquarters accompanied me, a lively youngster with flashing eyes. I asked him, so how is it in your regiment? Willingly he replied, we hope that it will start soon and we can get to Stalingrad at last. We have been tramping enough and are enjoying our longer rest period. We have had enough of the steppe. One does not find any proper accommodation at all. In France it was nicer and we would all like to go back. Will you make it to Stalingrad? Our regiment, Colonel, has not yet refused anything. With the last replacements, many old soldiers return to us. They complain, but if anything happens they are there. Most of them have been wounded several times, so they are proper frontline pigs on whom our colonel can depend. That is fine, then nothing can go bad for us. There is the regimental headquarters, Colonel. The soldier pointed to a still young wood in front of us. Abraham was already waiting for me, Breithaupt having signaled our movements. We had not seen each other since the beginning of the war. Already in greeting each other I noticed that he had changed little, or was he only giving that impression as he greeted me somewhat flippantly? Adam, I was already thinking that the army adjutant had forgotten his old comrade. How can you say something like that? You know what has been going on with us these last few weeks. Only today, before the attack begins, has there been a bit of peace. And I immediately used this opportunity to visit my old friends. Are you content now? It was not meant seriously, old chap. I am delighted that we can see each other again at long last. How lovely it would be if we only had one of the bottles of beer that we emptied so many times together in Trier. But in this dried up steppe there is never enough drinking water. We slipped through the light wood towards the dawn. There was not a soldier to be seen. Only painted signs showed that dozens of units had been here. Telephone cables hung from the boughs of the trees. Mortars were hidden in the bushes. Once we had crossed the wood on a beaten path, we came to a wooden shield fastened to a tree. Regimental Commander's command post was written on it, with an arrow pointing to the dawn. We now came to the edge of a deep cleft. It leads directly to the river, explained Abraham. That is an eroded valley, a so-called baka. I have heard of them. Today is the first time I have seen what such a gorge looks like. It is astonishing what work the water has done. One could accommodate a whole company in it, and more. In this baka at least 2 companies have had ample room. There are at least half a dozen such gullies in my position alone. An observation post lay before us in a thick clump of bushes. Beyond it the ground fell steeply to the river, on whose dark flood the evening sun was mirrored. Over the opposite bank my view went far across the steppe. Behind there must be a big city on the Volga. I looked through the telescope. Is the east bank occupied at all? Of course, but the Russians have camouflaged themselves so carefully that hardly any of them is discernible. By day nothing moves on the bank. But they have their machine gun nests there. We have tried offering them suitable targets, but they whistle at them. Not a shot is fired. Not even at night when it becomes livelier over there. We have identified some nests. I'll point the telescope for you. Do you see the nest in the crosshairs? I looked through it. It took at least 10 seconds for me to identify the machine gun position. When I turned back to Abraham, his face seemed to have changed. The derisive expression on his face had disappeared. His lips were pressed together. His eyes looked at me earnestly, quite rigidly. If our heavy weapons don't completely smash the enemy positions, the river crossing will cost us a lot of men. We have discussed the coordination of artillery, mortars and sappers in detail. Nevertheless, there remains a big question mark. I would bring the infantry guns far enough forward for them to be able to destroy the newly advancing enemy in the direct line of fire. That has happened, and you can see them for yourself. I am interested in something else, said the regimental commander. How is it with replacements that are certainly so necessary before the forthcoming fighting? That is a dark chapter. The newly conscripted recruits will not be trained until the end of December. We must just hope for good luck. Evening was approaching. It was high time that I was making my way back, but Abraham wanted to show me the artillery positions. One had to recognize that the regiment had not treated them lightly. The guns were well camouflaged and had a wide and free field of fire. Slit trenches for the crews, piles of ammunition, and immaculate positions, everything done exactly according to the fighting instructions. Abraham remarked that there was a certain fatigue and exhaustion detectable among the soldiers. There was also some complaining, but that was typical of soldiers, who always complain about something or other. "And how is it with you personally, Abraham?" "Nothing special. The regimental doctor wanted to put me in hospital a few days ago. Of course I refused. How would it look if the commander left his regiment in the muck shortly before an attack?" "What is wrong then?" "The doctor wanted to send me to a specialist because of my nerves. I can hardly sleep anymore. I am as if shattered during the day, but now we have to get across the Don. Let me know immediately if it gets worse. You will be no good to the troops if you collapse, and now, for tomorrow, all the best." It had already become late when I climbed back into my vehicle. "Will we reach our headquarters before nightfall?" "I don't think so, Colonel. The sun has already vanished and the night comes here very suddenly," said my driver. "We can at least reach the supply route before dusk. We must go to the west of this village to reach it," I said, with a look at the map spread out on my knees. Again we were smothered in a cloud of dust. Even in the half-light of the departing day, the journey was no easier than on the drive here in the afternoon. As we moved against the stream of traffic, coming towards us were trucks, field kitchens and horse-drawn carts that we had to avoid. So we crept forward, often having to stop, driving in the first and second gears. I must have been quite a time lost in my thoughts when the driver's voice gave me a start. "Colonel, I think we have lost our way. We should have been on the main road a long time ago." Damn it, yes, my luminous watch showed 6:30 p.m. It was already dark. The oncoming traffic had disappeared without my having noticed until now. Angry with myself, I had to stop. We were standing on a road that was overgrown with steppe grass. Heavily used stretches no longer had any grass. There was often black, powdery dust here in the daytime. So we must have got onto a little used road. What now? Turn around. 5 minutes later we reached a crossroads. I looked with a pocket torch for our car's tracks, but it was a hopeless task. There were vehicle tracks everywhere. At that point some white flares went up not far from us. With the help of my compass I established that they had been fired to the east of us. That was where the front line must be. Apparently we had taken a route that ran parallel to the Don. I instructed the driver to keep going north. At some point or other we should come across the main road. It did not take long until a light blinked at us. We drove up to it. It came from a truck that had broken down. The 2 soldiers with it, who belonged to a 76th Infantry Division supply unit, told us that we were on the right route. We reached the main road after about 1,500 meters. We progressed only slowly. It was 11 p.m. before we reached our headquarters in Osanovka. They were already concerned about us as the 76th Infantry Division had reported our departure. It was no longer possible to think about sleeping. I reported my impressions. Paulus too was happy to have returned from his journey. Our opinions were that all preparations had been made to ensure the success of the offensive. The clock showed 2 a.m. I lay awake on my camp bed. The light was switched off. The fresh night air came in through the open window. The moon touched the little room with its weak shine, or was it the dawning day already? I looked at the clock. 2:30 p.m. Another 60 minutes. Unrest gripped me. I left my quarters and went to the first general staff officer. Practically all of the headquarters staff were present. Once more the time was confirmed with the general staff. Then General Paulus also entered the room. It was time. Punctually at the fixed time, the thunder of the guns ripped through the quiet of the yielding night. It provided the horribly exciting overture for the thrust over the Don. Following a short bombardment, the assault and inflatable craft were put into the water with infantrymen and sappers. Smoking a cigarette, Paulus sat at a map table, his face twitching. We were all tense like this. What would the first reports bring? The first general staff officer had gone directly to the telephone exchange. He was in constant contact with the Corps, which was leading the attack. It seemed to us an eternity before he finally returned. The talking stopped and all eyes were directed expectantly at him. "General, the first report from the Corps, the 295th Infantry Division has reached the opposite bank and is advancing further. Few losses. Of the 76th Infantry Division, only one regiment has crossed the Don. The attack by the 2nd Infantry Regiment was repelled with heavy losses. Numerous inflatable craft and assault boats have been lost. The commanding general has gone to the 76th Infantry Division. "What has the Corps done to help the regiment?" asked Paulus. The report was passed by an orderly officer. "I know no details at the moment, but will go immediately to contact the Corps Chief of Staff." Silence reigned in the room. Apparently, what Abraham had told me the day before on the steep bank of the Don had come to pass. If our heavy weapons don't completely smash the enemy positions, the river crossing will cost us a lot of men. Confirmation of this was brought by the first orderly officer, who had already entered. The 76th Infantry Division has just given the reason for the failure of its regiment advancing on the right. When the boats of the first wave were already 2/3 across the river, they were hit by murderous defensive fire coming from some excellently concealed machine guns and mortars. The regiment has suffered severe casualties. The boats have been sunk. Only a few soldiers were able to swim back. The Corps ordered the 295th Infantry Division on the opposite bank from the right-hand sector of the 76th Infantry Division to relieve them by making a thrust in the enemy rear. Paulus agreed with the measures taken by the Corps. He told the orderly officer, "The Corps is to report when the regiment's attack is resumed." The Army staff officers went off to their offices. The news soon came through that the renewed attack by the infantry regiment had been successful. The enemy was being rolled back, thus both divisions of the Corps were able to form bridgeheads on the eastern bank of the Don, which quickly repulsed hefty attacks by the enemy. Meanwhile, the sappers were working feverishly at constructing the bridges to enable the 14th Panzer Corps to take part in the attack on the Volga. Bridges were being built near Peskavatka and Vršiači. On the August 23, the 16th Panzer Division, as well as the 3rd and 60th Motorized Infantry Divisions, went into the attack from the Don bridgehead. In the early hours of the morning, they broke through the enemy defensive line and advanced over the range of heights north of Malorosashka, G137 Kani Halt, reaching the Volga north of Stalingrad in the evening of the same day. This thrust formed a 60-kilometer-long, 8-kilometer-wide corridor. It went so quickly that the infantry divisions could not follow up fast enough, and were unable to prevent the Soviet units closing up their defensive front behind the 14th Panzer Corps. The Panzer Corps was cut off for days. With a massive counterattack, especially against its unprotected flanks, it was in serious trouble. It had to be supplied by aircraft and convoys of trucks, loaded with wounded. The vehicles broke through the Soviet lines towards the Don under the protection of the tanks. At the bridgehead, the wounded were handed over to the main dressing stations. Afterwards, the most important supplies were loaded up and, under escort by the tanks, the trucks returned the same way to the Corps. The latter was unable to take the northern part of the city by surprise. It stood for days, isolated from the army.